So this is the second part of a three-part program. And what we've tried to do is assemble an extremely diverse set of companies in a wide range of different market spaces. And my hope is to make this interactive as well. So we've got 5 distinguished panelists, all senior executives at their respective companies, all quite iconic in their innovation prowess. And I'm going to really try to drive questions based on some themes around each of the 5 panelists. And I'm going to call on them one at a time. I'm going to try to manage this a little bit differently, maybe get a little bit of interaction going, but I really want to avoid the I like what you said or she said type of panel. It doesn't work really well for me, so I'm going to kind of try to not let that happen. But as we dig into a theme, if there's some resonance around a theme, I also want to open it up and take a question or two. So this evening we've got 5 panelists. We've got Allison Mnookin, VP and GM at Intuit. We're going to lead off with Allison as we get into some extraordinary things that Intuit is doing. We've got Doug Williams, EVP of R&D at Biogen, an iconic biotech company, the first independent biotech company on the planet. Mike Turillo over here, the chairman of the board of Inno360, an extremely interesting company in the innovation space that I'm sure he was chomping at the bit when Hitendra asked the question, how do you manage and prioritize that insane amount of volume? That's exactly what Inno360 is designed to do. They spun out of P&G, and they've got some very interesting lighthouse customers that have helped them do that. We've got Steve and Todd. Stephen, congratulations. This is part of your day like your wedding and the birth of your children that you'll always remember. Very distinguished honor. One of just 6 distinguished engineers at EMC, and the only one to be named this year. Hearty congratulations to you. Great to celebrate that with you tonight. And last but not least, Sean Belka from Fidelity at the far end of the panel. Fidelity, from my early days in the startup world here 25 years ago, has always been a real good friend and an incredibly rigorous lighthouse customer for startup companies. If you could satisfy Fidelity, you knew you were off and on your way to doing something special. So let's start with Allison. Allison works for Intuit. Intuit is a remarkable company. It's the first company that gave Bill Gates a black eye. Okay, Bill Gates could pretty much steamroll anybody he wanted to, and he did. And then he went up against some guy named Scott Cook that got trained at P&G and brought consumer packaged goods marketing methodology to the software business, and he kicked Bill's ass. Okay? He kicked it so well that Intuit today has 90% retail market share of both QuickBooks and TurboTax. Now the challenge is, what do you do for an encore? Okay, that's a good thing, but how do you grow the business? So there's no question that when you are in such a dominant position, you've got to get very, very creative. So, and forgive me, Allison, I am so enthusiastic about the way that you transformed this company that it's hard to contain myself. But in some of the readings I've done, and in some of the discussions I've had with Allison, Scott Cook and his new CEO were being extremely honest. And Sanjay, to your point, they weren't willing to write their obituary quite yet. They recognized that they needed to innovate much more aggressively. And they had seen that only 4 of their 50 new products over the past 10 years had hit a $50 million revenue run rate. So they knew they had to do something. They were in a basic static mode. But they have done some remarkable things. And one of the remarkable things they've done is they've moved a lot of their clients to the cloud. Very few companies have been able to convert their installed base to the cloud as elegantly and as effectively as Intuit. Okay? And what I'm going to now ask Allison to talk about is, I assume most of you know the lean startup methodology, and potentially some of you in startups are using it to run your own businesses. It's the rare corporation indeed, the rare $4 billion corporation with almost 9,000 employees that has so wholeheartedly embraced lean startup in the way they run their business. So Allison, can you talk about how that all happened?
Yeah. You all hear me?
Yeah.
You really have to love the mic here. So someone raise a hand if I stop doing that. I think for us in some ways it was an evolution. There have been a set of principles of solving big, important problems that were not solved well that have been at the core of how Intuit has thought about the spaces we want to go into. And what we call Design for Delight, our methodology of starting with deep customer empathy. Do you know your customer or prospect incredibly well? Do you walk in their shoes? Do you not listen to what they say, but do you observe what they do? And then go wide in the possibility of how you can solve that, and then experiment. And what Lean Startup and the work that Eric Rees, conversations he started with Scott and Brad, really helped us refine is the experiment portion of that. And to the point where we take our top several hundred leaders off for a 2-day offsite. And this was the topic of conversation for the entire senior leadership of the company, of how do we have a hypothesis-driven, experiment-driven strategy, which is basically learn that 89% of bets fail. So how do you fail incredibly fast? And how is it not the hippo in the room, the highest paid employee that wins, but how is it the data of the experiment that tells you what's a winner? And I'll give you, maybe it's useful to just give one example of both the flop and the way in which this mindset is impacting some of what we're doing in the world. So we as a company had not been particularly global, and had decided we wanted not just a development site in India, but we wanted to serve some of the market there. And so that was Brad's challenge to sort of this new global team of go figure out how to have a business in India, not just an engineering location. And the senior leadership had a brilliant idea that was going to be founded on taking one of our products, doing a huge partnership with a major telco that you've heard of, starting this partnership, using that as a channel and pushing it out. And Scott relishes a bit in telling the story of guess how many units as this product rolled out in market it sold. And he guesses, so week 1, call, how's it going? Week 2, week 3, how many units sold? Major telco, distributed all over India, huge partnership, it took 8 months to sign the legal terms, whatever. Any guesses? 4. 4 units, months of work, total flop. I think within a few months they pulled the cord. Where in contrast, the notion of we're big believers in innovation, I think there was discussion, innovation can come from anywhere. Every employee at Intuit has 10% of their time to do with what they want, whatever innovation they see. And there was a small team of 3 who, with this challenge that Brad put out, said, what are big problems that are unsolved in India? Well, we serve small businesses as a company. That's one of our core competencies. And they looked and said, what are the small businesses in India? Well, I didn't know this data, but 150 million farmers in India. By definition, most of them small. And they started studying and going out and chatting with Indian farmers and said, what are your pain points? And this little team of 3 started seeing some pain points of those farmers. What crops should I plant? Started exploring, is there an idea there? Thought some about that. Where do I sell the crop I have that perishes fast? I can drive so far in this direction, so far in that direction. Which should I do? It's really hard to figure out which market in a highly volatile, sort of commodity space I should sell it. And on that idea, they started to say, is that really a problem? So lean startup, like 3 people in their white space time, so that's what we call their 10% time, had this hypothesis that maybe we could do something to help farmers figure out where to sell their stuff. And their hypothesis of, if I could point them in the right spot, I might be able to help them make more money, which would be meaningful to them. So a little tweak to Eric's model, which I think in spirit he got right, but if you're a visual person, our belief that the visual is a little bit wrong, which was idea to build. And in our experience, too often, that's the engineering mindset, idea to build and then learn. We believe idea, hypothesis, test, and only build if you have to, if you've proven it's real and right. But so this team totally FACO back in, put humans out at markets, figured out prices, saw that all these farmers had maybe not super smartphones, but they all knew how to text. And even if they weren't super literate, they recognized city names and they knew the economics of their business. And so if they go back in, humans texting, they did I'll text you the response for the good you have, this market, that market, which should you sell at? And would the middle market buyers be willing to play? And just experiment by experiment, they start proving, I can actually drive a 20% improvement in your bottom line income by doing this. And it was through that example of, I think it's a great example of a lot of what innovation at Intuit is about, of every employee has the right. It's the data that wins in terms of what things will fund and keep going, and try to do as fast. This is where I think from Eric, we've learned a ton of challenging ourselves to say, 3 people in 3 weeks, what can you learn? Versus 50 people in 6 months or whatever else.
So there was a question that was directed at both Sanjay and Deborah. Are you innovating fast enough? And most large corporations would be lying through their teeth and say yes. But Brad Smith has this mantra, I get a market in 6 weeks. Is it real? Is it possible? Is it insane?
It's an awesome question. I think, yes, all of us should always have a dissatisfied attitude. We've gotten hugely faster. And I think part of it is redefining the notion of market. I could buy Google AdWords tomorrow on an idea and see whether anyone buys and say, I'm really sorry, actually we don't have that product yet, but when we do, I'll let you know. And I can go test that tomorrow. And if I can't drive the demand, forget the rest of it. So I do think we've dramatically shifted our mindset of proving or disproving, trying to get the 89% of failures out as fast as you humanly can. And with 10% of every employee's time, band up with some others. We have an internal tool we call Brainstorm, where innovators want to find other innovators to band with. Jay, who's sitting here, works on that team.
You're talking about that tool. This again goes back to Andrew's question. I'm sure you've got an install base of 60 million customers, so your volume of input must be insane.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize input from that scale of market?
That's an awesome question. I don't think there's ever a perfect. What we try to do is give folks as many ways as possible without needing a hippo to approve it, to get through some of the first stages of, can I show there's interest?
And just so everyone knows, hippo is the highest paid person in the room.
Correct.
Okay, which means that they're smarter than you by 3.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta love it when your billionaire founder says, take decisions away from the bosses.
Yeah.
Right. The bosses should not have the decisions, and we play by the same rules. Scott will sit there as he's in a discussion with a team and say, what does the data say? What does the customer say? What test have you run? What 7 ideas did you have that you tested to pick the one? And it's not what I care about that wins, right? It's not that big telco partnership that didn't work.
So you've moved, out of your 60 million client install base, you've moved the number from 15% to 75% in the last 4 years, from package to online, right? So it gives you massive opportunity for building a data aggregation. Right?
Yep.
You're the person running that business. Talk about how you think about the next wave of innovation and how you capitalize on all that incredible data that you now have access to.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is I can give you the 30 seconds on the business I run, because that would probably be a slight mischaracterization. And then some of the things we are doing with some of that data. So the business I run is called QuickBase. It's a cloud platform that lets non-technical people build their own apps and solutions in the cloud, whether it be mobile or desktop-based. And in some ways, we view that as putting process innovation in the hands of every employee, right? So we have about 8,000 employees at Intuit. We use this tool internally intensely. Over 9,500 different solutions have been built to improve processes in the company. And half the Fortune 100 use us for something, but it's very much in that consumerization of IT. You can now self-solve. You don't need to wait the 6 months to say, please, when you're done with your SAP implementation, can you get to me, Mr. IT, with too long a queue? So that's what my business does. We also, and it was a derivative of this business that is now actually run separately, where we are putting, for instance, in the small business division, as many of our customers' data in the cloud when they're willing to, and we now have an Intuit partner platform that opens that. So from an open innovation perspective, hundreds of others who have interesting problems to solve for small businesses with that business's permission can now add to that ecosystem. We know there's an incredibly long tail of needs that we'll never solve well, and we can enable the small business to have the solutions and other partners in the ecosystem to access the data to deliver a more seamless experience. But so many ways we're trying to let an open world deliver on those solutions, knowing we will do it all.
Let me throw one last question and I'll open up to our audience. I started my career with Hewlett Packard in 1983, when Bill and Dave were still running the show. And it was at that time America's most admired company. They used a very key metric that you never used. The amount of revenue that is generated by products developed in the last 3 years. Yours is $100 million. For a $4 billion company, given everything else I've heard, it doesn't sound as aggressive as I would expect. What are you thinking longer term? What percentage of revenue should be generated by all of these brand new products that you're trying?
That was my perfect question. Obviously, we're a company whose growth rate's been accelerating. When you want to go from high single digits to double digits to higher, obviously the amount of that growth, 100 million, doesn't cut it. And some of that is what are innovations tied to the core and what are totally disruptive innovations. But we keep pushing on that, and obviously sometimes to the M&A or acquisition you supplement there as well. But we keep pushing higher. We think a lot about our businesses as a portfolio of horizons. I think it was Jeff Moore who we first stole the concept of horizon planning from. If Horizon 1 is sort of the core businesses that you're known for us, TurboTax, QuickBooks, Quicken. Horizon 2 are sort of your adolescents, who are probably growing faster, but not at scale, and Horizon 3s are the glimmer in your eye. Part of what we also look at, because the Horizon 3s aren't about revenue yet, they're about opportunity, is what is the mix, both of what's in the pipeline across all three, what's the resource allocation across all three. So that's another metric we hold ourselves to.
That's great. And where's Brent?
Absolutely.
So you talked about that we don't promote ourselves very well. So Allison did her dual degrees at Harvard, has lived in Silicon Valley working for Intuit, one of the rare examples of someone who's come back to Boston.
That's right.
So that's great.
But still got lost getting here.
Yeah, exactly. So what questions does our audience have for Allison? Take 2 or 3 questions right now. Just, please, in the corner.
I think the question is that what I hear about your approach is that you're looking for more from the data from the market, pulling out the ideas. Now, then you have the other extreme, like Apple, whereby they say the customers don't have any good idea what they want. We know what's better for them, and then amazing products that add significant value to the top line, right? I mean, billions of dollars. Every product they launch is like multi-billion. So is there like a hybrid model? In some cases, some will work. I mean, the companies need to understand their DNA and decide what's the right model for them.
Let me just restate just for the audience, because it probably wasn't picked up on that. So just trying to really simplify the question. There's the Steve Jobs approach, which is our customers don't know what they want. We will tell them what they want. And that has driven obviously a very significant business. But the more traditional business is to put your pants on one leg at a time business, which is to ask your customers what they want and give it to them. Is there some hybrid approach to innovation?
Well, and I want to clarify one thing, because while we listen incredibly intensely to customers and prospects, I would say, at least for me, I deeply believe most of them lie and often do, not meaning to. But so what we actually focus on more than listening to what they say is watching what they do. And I would posit that had you watched me traveling cross country with infants, with DVDs and those old, flip open VCR things, and scrambling with a 2-year-old on a plane, you could have observed my pain that was a really annoying way to entertain my 2-year-old. So you could have observed that pain. Would I have told you I wanted my iPad that's sitting there, and that would be a much more delightful way to not only have my work, my books, but also the movies for my kids? I couldn't have told you that. But you could have observed my pain. So the thing we try to do most is watch, where are people struggling? Where is it a pain that matters, that we can solve well, that you can observe? So the difference between observation and what they'll tell you.
All right, one last question before we move to our next panelist. Anybody else have a question for Allison? Okay. Oh, we do. Okay, over here, please.
So a slight extension of the same thing. During shifting markets, you might be operating in a market where you listen to your customer, and the market might be shifting underneath you. And those new customers, either you don't have a chance to reach, or you don't have ways to get the data, or maybe there's no data. Any ideas around?
Yeah, and I should be careful in saying customers because I sort of mean customers and prospects. But so if the question is, if the market's shifting, how do you observe that? Well, one of the things you may have quoted, I used to run QuickBooks. Yes, we have 90% share as measured by retail sales of accounting software. And you could say, where is their growth? But I would tell you, we have 6 million small businesses in the US, of 26 million US small businesses, and globally, I don't even remember the number, but vastly more than that. So if you define your market not as the subsegment of the slice that you happen to serve today, but as broadly as you can define it, you do start observing, well, guess what? There's these huge segments that I don't serve, and what's going on there, what's going on in non-consumption. So I think that's one of the ways you can help is in carefully thinking about how you define your market spaces.
Great, thank you. All right, now we're going to go with my friend from EMC, Stephen Todd. Stephen, this is your house tonight. How many EMC people do we have in the room tonight? Okay, do the wave, right? So we heard from Sanjay. A lot of areas we can go, limited time. You have been responsible really for creating, along with your team, that system that helps you drive prioritization using your own internal analytics, your own systems, right? And as you've scaled your organization globally, as you've scaled in terms of new acquisitions, in an incredibly complex product space, how are you managing things forward? Stay on top.
So my title is Director of Global Innovation at EMC. And so I come in after the fact with Sanjay building out the COE framework globally and trying to manage innovation globally. And so job number one is to reach out to all those employees in whatever locale they're in and encourage the expansion of knowledge. Right? Go out in your local market, learn what customer problems are, learn what the latest university research in, learn about startups, right? And then the second part of my job is to encourage knowledge transfer inside of EMC, which Sanjay would label as throwing apples at each other, right? And my job is to watch our employees and encourage our employees to share that knowledge that they're getting locally, globally. And then the CTO office watches that stream of knowledge transfer and looks for opportunities to turn that into assets. Could be a patent, could be a publication, could be a new product, could be a new service. So that job that I just described is way out of scale for any sort of manual effort. So what EMC has decided to do is to use our analytics capability, right? We have analytics products. And so for a year and a half, I met with the same team of people at 7 a.m. East Coast time every week. And that includes Israel, Ireland, India, Egypt, China, Russia. And I said, how are we going to measure the expansion of knowledge in your location and measure your transfer of knowledge amongst each other? And we designed an actual analytics framework where anytime anybody visits a partner, a startup, a university, submits an idea in a certain location, we can actually count that activity and view that as a metric for expanding knowledge. And so this, you can just think of this as contributing minutes or presentations or publications into a centralized database, and that database we call Greenplum. And Greenplum has built-in analytics, and now I have a dashboard of innovation activity in my company. I know who the top innovators are. I know what their area of expertise is. I can see the knowledge transfer happening, and we can identify gaps in our portfolio and areas of investment based on that. So in a nutshell, we've taken a manual effort of trying to anecdotally observe knowledge expansion and transfer, and we put that into an analytics framework.
How long did it take you to develop? And when did you hit a threshold where you said, you know what, this stuff is actually working? Give us an example where you said, you know what, this system is working as it was intended.
We had about 6 months of meetings. We had about 5 or 6 months of prototyping. After 1 year, I could walk up to the software and say, what knowledge is expanding the fastest in Russia? And the answer came back, compression. Makes sense. Russians, math, some of our top people. I asked the same question for China, and I get back Hadoop, right, which is an analytic framework that they study intensely. I asked a question in Cairo, and I got back cloud computing. The Cairo government is trying to build cloud computing capacity, and they use their universities to explore that, and we're reaching out into universities. So it was after about a year we knew we were onto something, and we decided to take that prototype effort and try and turn it into a more formal program, which we think will probably take another year or so.
In Sanjay's humble way, he said that any corporation that was willing to give itself a good grade on its innovation capabilities was probably delusional. So I know we've had this discussion, and I'm going to put you on the spot, but what grade would you give EMC on your innovation? So maybe over the last few years, maybe how that grade has improved as you've gotten more systemized.
Right, so before I can give myself a grade, I need to know where I'm at and how fast I am with innovation. And the answer is, I don't know, right, because I've never measured. Right, so now we're putting metrics in place, right, and we can see from the time we first do a university visit, how long does it take to file a patent or publish a paper, right? So now it's much easier to grade myself. So I would give EMC a B in this regard, because innovation measurement through analytics is cutting edge and it's new.
Yeah, and what are the key metrics? We talked about each of percentage of revenue generated by products introduced in the last 3 years. Time to market, idea to market in 6 months, very ambitious. What are the key metrics that you're looking at?
So the key metrics that we're using is less revenue-based and more how often are we transferring knowledge inside EMC. So the theory or the hypothesis is that the more that EMC employees transfer and share knowledge with each other and make that visible, the more quickly we have the data that we need to make decisions about products and investments.
And what excites you most about sort of the next wave of opportunity to further optimize the innovation ecosystem around us? What are the big opportunities?
So the big opportunities is we're positioned in emerging markets. So especially, for example, in Africa, right? We talk about reverse innovation, and often we think about it from the consumer point of view. Let's build cheap consumer devices in emerging economies, and then bring that to wealthier countries. But these emerging countries, they also want to build cloud computing infrastructures. So Wissam, our distinguished engineer, actually traveled to Egypt, right? Traveled to Egypt.
So we had a got promoted so we can do Sanjay slides. Cool.
I did not have him do slides while I was over there, but we sent him out into the universities and we tried to solve the problem. How can you build a cloud as cheaply as possible? And start the universities there, and then off they go. And we're involved in the conversation. So we run into situations where an emerging country says, we don't really want to purchase your high-end equipment, but we've got a running head start on what they might want to purchase.
That's great. Last question, I'm going to open it up. That question is, we talked briefly about your ability to bring in some IP from China that allowed you to maybe deliver a product that you might not have been able to do without being able to find that.
Right, so EMC, in addition to being an enterprise company, we have we sell consumer devices called iOmega. And in China, our engineers found that the BitTorrent streaming software was the preferred way to share large files, videos, music. And once they actually did the work to put BitTorrent inside the iOmega device, and then we did worldwide sales with that. So an example of not coming up with the idea at headquarters, but coming up with the idea in a geography where it was more relevant.
Okay. I've been asked to not open for question, just to keep things on track, because we started about 15 minutes late. So I'm going to transition. Sean, would you be, would someone kindly hand Sean the microphone? So Sean Belka from Fidelity. So Sean, I think what we'll start off is, I mean, Fidelity, largest mutual fund company, one of the very largest mutual fund companies, moving from 200 million in assets to, if I remember the number correctly, it was 3.7 trillion in assets, so they undermanaged. So that's a classic innovator's dilemma problem. So right here in town, we've got this guy named Clay Christensen. He talked a lot about the innovator's dilemma. How does a company scale from 200 million to $17 trillion in assets? What are some of the key innovation systems that you got to put in place to do that?
Great question. And first of all, I want to thank Nina and TiE for inviting me here. It's a real honor to be here. I think a lot of my Fidelity colleagues who are charter members of this group. It's very humble to be here. Thank you. I think it's a great question. If you look at when the firm started, so the firm started 66 years ago, it was basically just doing one type of product, basically active mutual funds. And over that time period, we had, grown that business. So that business is a little bit under $1 trillion. Turn it on.
Okay.
That's one part, but we've also birthed other businesses that are fairly large. For example, our 401k business, we're the largest in that. We look at what we do in terms of providing a platform for insurance companies. We look at charitable giving, et cetera. So I think the advantage we've had is that there was kind of a true north here. We wanted to help investors be successful, and we thought the way to do that was to do best customer experience and best investment outcomes. So that's a very broad playing field. And there was a lot of growth opportunities for businesses. In other words, it's just defining where an active mutual fund manager. It's a narrow playing field, classic market myopia probably. And so if we had said that, I doubt we would be the size we would, because that market is for size and has a life cycle. And so the real question is, at what level of aspiration? And I think to ignore your instructions not to build on other people, I am going to say, Allison's point around really falling in love with the problem, not the solution, being empathetic for the need, opened our eyes. So as an example, our funds network platform, where we sell other people's mutual funds, has roughly $1 trillion on it, and that wouldn't have emanated from the people managing money. That was a different thing. We said customers want other products. They want to be able to get exposure to other asset classes. And so that idea of being a slightly higher level of customer need, as opposed to supply side thinking about where competency is, what the product is, gave us an umbrella for that approach.
So unlike the other 4 people on this panel that will either sell new technology, software, systems and software, or pharmaceuticals, you are selling financial services, but you are enabling that business with technology. And Fidelity was my very first customer, 2 of my startups, right, which was a very rare thing indeed. So you have a very interesting job. Describe the portfolio of responsibilities that you have, because I think it was surprising to me, and I know Fidelity pretty well, because it takes all of those different types of interdisciplinary technology domains to make Fidelity what it is. So can you describe Fidelity Labs and Advanced Technology Center, what you're doing?
Well, you used to phrase when we started about corporate catalyst. So our role is to be a catalyst. So we're, it's about 40,000 people. My group is much smaller than that. But our goal is really to work with our business partners. Some of us here this evening to say, at one level, it's really to bring the outside in. So we have relationships with things like the MIT Media Lab or Stanford D School, and how do we bring in those to a company where a lot of people, they have day jobs and work very hard. At the same time, how do we bring in techniques that help them accelerate their innovation efforts? And then how do we be the tip of the spear for them? How do we do pilots and prototypes that enable them to stay mission focused and on their roadmap, but really enable them to at the same time be experimenting with other things? And where we in our group have a dream to fail fast and cheaply, and not have it be mission critical for the customer.
Now, like that, you're in a highly regulated business, right? And you're there to protect the hard-earned assets of your clients. What unique challenges are presented to you when you are under such extraordinary regulatory constraints? How do you manage it?
First, I'm glad to hear you acknowledge our regulatory constraints. So you seem to feel we're completely unregulated. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But regulations are created to protect consumers, and we want to protect consumers. I mean, we've been in the business a long time. We intend to be in this a long time. The goal around privacy, around security, around suitability for customers, those are goals we share with regulators. And It does create a framework. It may sometimes result in us not being as quick off the mark as we'd like. But inevitably, we're in a shared framework. Our goal is to make investments grow, to have them be safe, to have them be secure, and to have privacy. And that's the goal we share.
When we spoke on the phone, you got very animated when you talked about open innovation, which is sometimes, in my mind, would be sort of contradictory to a heavily regulated financial services company. You had spoken about the ability to educate people on globe, highly interconnected. How does Fidelity take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations around, is the pace of innovation speeding up, or just every generation are we thinking faster? And so, one hypothesis might be that if you look at the pace of innovation historically, it's been maybe driven by the number of educated people and the speed and kind of richness with which they can collaborate. To go back 200 years, it might be a small set of people sending letters across an ocean. Right now, it's a million educated people instantaneously communicating in a very rich and robust way. So I think there is something to the argument that there's a faster pace. So then the question is, how do you tap it? And how do you take advantage of it as opposed to it kind of blindsiding you? So we also have globally distributed R&D in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia. And so part of it is listening all around the world. It's happening around the world. Second thing, and it gets to workflow, and we talked a little bit about this, but how do you get an idea into a process and then so, and that's where a lot of times big organizations fall. Someone had that idea somewhere, but it didn't get to the right person who could fund it. And that's where we try to have multiple vehicles for listening, multiple processes for people to enter, and multiple people who can say yes to funding, not just say no. And part of that is, we have a venture capital arm, we have other ways of reaching out to the community, but it's things like last night, and I apologize for anything there, you had to listen to me at the Mass Challenge Awards, where, we were sponsoring a large startup competition today. We sponsored X Economy and Big Data. So it's really being proactive in that. It's not just saying, we're going to sit here in our office and wait for ideas to come to us, and how to get out there.
And I think that makes you very unique in the role of financial services. I know I was very involved in your state of the environment a couple of years ago. You guys were way out in front of that. Thank you. All right, Doug, I'm going to turn to you. So, Doug, you also sit under intense regulation, but we're sitting in a period now where both the FDA and the FTC love the word generics. They love to impose on companies like yours that have invested hundreds of millions or billion plus into new drug development, a shortening of your IP rights, and so you're going through that incredible scrutiny, if not downright warfare. And at the same time, you've got these 12 to 15-year development cycles, which are orders of magnitude more than anybody else here. How do you possibly manage that?
It's a real challenge, and I think you've highlighted the issues for us as an industry, which is heavy regulation, and in a similar vein, it's appropriate regulation. Think about what we do. We are exposing patients to drugs that, in some cases have not been extensively tested. So, we have an obligation to the patients, and that's what drives everything we do. But we also, I think, are trying in many ways to work with the regulators to try to find better ways and quicker ways to actually get drugs to patients. There's a lot of talk out there about the antagonism between regulators and the pharma industry, and to a certain extent, I think that's kind of a natural tension. But there's been a lot of efforts underway recently to try to bring the pharma industry closer to the regulators and to find ways to come up with innovative strategies to get drugs to patients more quickly. There was just a report issued by a group called PCAST, which Eric Lander over here at the Broad Institute managed, which really was all about trying to find ways of using regulation that already exists, and essentially finding ways to put pressure on the regulators to use the tools they already have. There's a lot of mechanisms in place to streamline and shorten the drug development process. They're not being used extensively, and they need to. But what we're trying to do is, actually as a company, be more intelligent and be more innovative, and just recognizing the fact that there's a finite lifespan on the patent life that we have.
Right.
Do what we can internally to use innovation to drive the decision-making process, both doing it better, but also doing it faster. We are a neurology company. primarily, which means that tissue of interest for us is largely inaccessible.
Yes.
It's not like doing leukemia research where you can take a blood sample and get a pretty good sense of what's going on. So we're using imaging. There's a revolution in imaging technology right now that allows us to actually see what's going on in the brain, in the target tissue. And we're aggressively deploying that kind of technology into our development program to try to streamline the process, accelerate the timelines, improve our success rates, and really just to deal with the reality that we're a regulated industry where the cycle times have been on the order of 10 to 12 years routinely. But I think there are ways in place, and certainly there are programs in our pipeline that are looking at processes that are much shorter, 5 years, 8 years, which is important. And we are in the biogenerics business now. We've actually taken some steps to go into what's called the biosimilars business, which is to develop proteins, generic versions of protein therapeutics. We think that that's an important part of the strategy of providing broader access to some of these medicines to a broader population of patients. It will lower the price after the patents, fall away. But I think that the companies that are probably best positioned to do that, given the complexity of making these proteins, are the innovator companies. So we've got a foot in both camps now, both the branded medicines that we make as innovator medicines, but also the biosimilars. We think both sides of that business are going to be important for us going forward.
So in the context of pharma research, bio research, where the IP protection is so critical. I know there's an effort recently at MIT where they're trying to bring together lots of different companies to collaborate and share, and if something didn't work for one, it would be blended by another. Is that moving forward, that type of more open collaborative effort? Must it be something that's happening today?
Yeah, it's absolutely happening. We're actually doing a lot of it ourselves. We've established some consortia around specific questions and specific diseases very recently. Some of these problems we're tackling are bigger than any one of us. I think we're coming to realize that given the complexity of the genetics of some of these large diseases like Alzheimer's, like ALS. ALS is a relatively small disease in terms of population, but it's a very complex disease. So consortia between companies and academia in particular are really starting to flourish right now. And you see a lot of it happening here where I would argue in the East-West battle, life sciences front, this is the center of gravity for the life sciences industry. This is the place where the ecosystem is the healthiest and where things are really happening. And a lot of that is because of places like Broad and Harvard and MIT, collaborating with companies like ours. And we've really cast the net and thought about consortia that involve not just a single institution, but multiple academic institutions, all focused on a common problem. And the reason I think those will work is because we've got skin in the game, in the sense that we're deploying some of our own internal research staff on these consortia, in addition to really tapping into the brain trusts around the country and around the world that are focused on some of the same issues that we're concerned with. So,
some of the analytics tools that Green Fund and EMC has developed internally, the stuff that Mike's going to talk about in a moment, is that something that you've also been working on to sort of manage this process, or is that not quite at that point?
Probably not at that point. I think our biggest issue is we've gone from a situation where data sets were relatively small a few years ago to everyone's talking about big data. For us, big data involves, sequencing the genomes of 1,000 patients. That's a lot of data to manage and analyze. That's what it takes to actually answer some of these questions. But, for us, I think starting a consortium, focusing on a problem that is tractable and that has common interest amongst all the players, you're seeing a lot of that happen now in various different forms. Pfizer has one model, we have another model, but everyone is doing it because it really makes sense to collaborate, because these are bigger problems than any one organization can tackle on their own.
The last question, and then we'll go to Mike. You've also been the president and leader of Startup. You're now part of one of the largest. What about the difference in how you manage an early stage venture capital backed bio company and how you manage this massive global R&D organization?
Yeah, it's a little bit different, to say the least. In a development stage biotech company, it's really about finding the next tranche of funding and making sure that you can support the innovation that you have ongoing. It's the same in a big company. It's just that the scale is different. I mean, we're constantly trying to reinvent ourselves within Biogen. We're constantly trying to find ways of innovating, hiring the best people, providing the best tools to our scientists. So it's a scale issue as opposed to whether or not the game is different. It's the same game. It's being very innovative. It's being as quick as you can. It's killing projects that aren't going to work as quickly as you can. And our failure rate is, I think, probably a little higher than yours. But it's all about the churn. It's making decisions quickly as you can and stopping the spend on projects.
Michael, last but certainly not least, great to have you here.
Thank you. I have a little deja vu almost 3 years ago with my back to the wall. And Anish Chopra was up at the front, which many of you know. Anish was speaking here just about a little over a year ago. It was about 4 days after the U.S. Senate had approved his appointment as the first CTO of the United States. And Anish was up there explaining what the president had asked him to do. Collaborate, free up information that the U.S. government held and let entrepreneurs and others use that information for new innovative ideas. And I'm sitting back here saying to myself, how do I tackle that guy and let him know what I've been doing? And during this particular conference, a Vencor challenge was being announced. This was the International Transportation Society. And you know how these conferences go. The first speaker gives 2 minutes on it, the next speaker spends 3 seconds, and the next one a minute or so. And Anish heard this, and he said that's what he wanted to do, and actually Anish came on me. And the deja vu I'm having is that as I was listening to some of the questions that you were putting both to our earlier panel speakers and what was going on here, geographical location that you're going through, multiple centers around the world, how do you put it together? EMC1, I heard you talk about social network. When I was the first chief knowledge officer for KPMG, I called it K-Work. You have some other topics we were talking about, just looking at my notes. How do you look at redundancy between innovation ideas? And how do you pull those through? How do you deal with large volumes and funnels of ideas? And how do you try to find the ones that make the most sense? Deborah put up a picture there about NASA looking for applications. We actually worked with NASA that did that. And NASA had its mission change from rather than exploring the world, enabling others to explore the world. And we came up with the innovation platform that actually did a lot of that. Another thing is how do you tap into the global mind? How do you put that together? Showing you were at Mass Challenge last night, giving Fidelity before the year. We had a sidecar competition at Mass Challenge last night, and we gave 2 prizes to additional problems that were there. So let me give you a little bit of catalyst for what this is all about. In 2006, we spun off a company called Innocentive from Eli Lilly. Innocentive was the brainchild of a guy by the name of Alf Bingham, who was the chief technology officer, the chief innovation officer, R&D at Lilly. And Al's idea was he had 3,600 people at Lilly reporting to him, but there were 36,000 people in the company. Why was he only addressing his problems to 3,600? Why not 36,000? So what Alf did is he created an intranet, and he started asking the 36,000 to solve the same problems that he did. He then, several years later, started to go to Pfizer and AstraZeneca and say, why don't we share? And they looked at it and said, we're nuts. So we spun it off. And of those of you who may be familiar with Innocentive, which is actually based here in Boston, it's a one-to-many. Procter & Gamble says, I've got a stain on this cotton shirt, I can't get it out. It goes to 250,000 people. I've got $85,000 for anybody who knows how to take that stain off the shirt. There's a process that goes back. In 2006, that was an innovative breakthrough idea. 2006, we started to look at a number of those ideas. And being a knowledge management, ex-knowledge management guy, I had scars on my back about the promises we made to each other about when we were going to solve the problem. So management was going to take care of it. So I said to my colleague, I was concerned about these new innovations because it looked like we're going to have silos over. So what we did is we went up 100,000 feet and we defined what we thought was this open, collaborative, innovative environment. We never put up a slide from IBM that had what I would refer to as specifications. She said it has to be open. It has to be one that's global, all of those great words, which is all true. But the real words that we found that you had to look for were the characteristics that it had to be trustworthy, it had to be transparent. Well, we concluded after a year and a half of research that this was not a technology challenge, this was a change management challenge. This was about behavior. This was about the ability for organizations to share with one another. We concluded that there were three things to this new innovation environment. Again, not rocket science, but common sense. The first is the innovation part around ideation. Are we defining the right innovation gap that we're trying to solve? Again, I'm going to violate your principle that Sean and Allison said. Understand what the consumer behavior is and work back from that. The second part is an enabling software technology, and we talked a little bit about NO360, where we solve, I think, the problem of volume. We look at over $10 billion, a billion pieces of data every single innovation activity that we go through. And that's growing every single day. 10 billion every single day. And like I say, it's growing by the millions as we go through it. There are 23 companies in this ecosystem right now. You would call them customers, we call them partners, and I'll explain why they say that. It's Disney, BASF, Procter & Gamble, Lockheed Martin, Johnson & Johnson, Kraft, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and I can go on with others. Ask me for a brochure, I don't have one. So let me relate to you as a startup entrepreneur. This is only 19 months old. I have no brochures. You go on our website, it doesn't reflect anything that's there. This has turned out viral, and it worked this way. You talked about the spinoff from Procter & Gamble. That's not exactly correct, but there's some closeness to it. One of my first colleagues was Larry Houston, who's the former Chief Innovation Officer of Procter & Gamble. And Procter & Gamble is, with Connect and Develop, one of the leaders in innovation for new product development. And Connect and Develop, their platform is exactly what it says. They connect internally, they developed internally, but they connected to their suppliers, 180 key suppliers that there. I walked into Procter & Gamble because Larry opened the door for me with a blank piece of paper that says, this is what we think open collaboration is going to look like. The new Chief Innovation Officer looked back at me and said, this is how the connection comes. I have $1.2 million of budget sitting on my desk right now for the next iteration of Connect. What you just described is everything that we plan to do. Some things that we're planning on doing, but not in this iteration. And we talked about some things we haven't even talked about. So I'm going to give you the $1.2 million. I'll give you Synergy and Connect and Develop. You build the next generation, and I'll talk to you about the iteration of TiE. I then went to General Mills. I then went to the Air Force Research Labs and the Wright brothers, who spend $4 billion a year on this. Went to NASA and went to BASF. For a year and a half, we co-developed this platform. Rather than just a bunch of people thinking that we're really smart, and now we're going to take it out to the marketplace. We actually took the marketplace inside, and we said, how do you manifest trustworthiness? How do you really manifest transparency? How do you change the behavior in an organization? These organizations today have adopted this particular approach because of the manifestation of those characteristics. Vencore is a prize and challenge. It's a social network. Those of you who are familiar with Mass Challenge, we're not only a sponsor of Mass Challenge, but we have a partnership with Mass Challenge as we're now expanding Mass Challenge into New York, doing the collaboration. Okay? So in this particular part, what you have is the ability to take the classical stuff of the innovation gap has to be defined. I'll give you an example. Johnson & Johnson, contact lenses, India, China, more of them have to have doctors, have to have prescription, have to have an expensive piece of equipment. In this platform, you found adjacencies. Joystick, flat screen, 15 feet between the patient and the flat screen, mathematical calculation of the image when it's clear. There's your prescription, no doctor, no expensive piece of equipment. It's innovation that's on the slide. When you're looking at the funneling piece that you're going through this, we have technologies that look at virtualization, if you will, and illustrations of the way in which you can look at not only redundancies, but someone made the comment, some redundancies are not bad. You pull them together in pictures. You show people that are working together in teams. You categorize them, and you take advantage of all of the social networking technology that's out there so that they become participative, because this is what they want to do. This is what their job is. This is what they get excited about. And you address the motivational aspects as opposed to the organizational aspects that are associated with it. When you're going to an open innovation environment that you're trying to really get transcended into the organization, you not only harness what's inside the global brain within the organization, but you then go to the suppliers. How BASF became a member of this is because P&G said, if you want to know what we're going to be innovating in products and services 2-3 years from now, this is the ecosystem that you have to be a part of. Meet Westvaco, which is one of the largest packaging companies, sells a lot of packaging to P&G, came on board the same way because this is the way they work on it. P&G, as you said, is now reinventing, innovating its approach to innovation because it reached this plateau. And this plateau right now is being expanded by taking this beyond the organization, into suppliers, into customers, into strategic partners, and pulling them all together. And then harnessing, again, as a startup, we have the advantage of no legacy. We started with a blank piece of paper. That if we could do it all over today, knowing what we would do now, knowing now what we would do, how would you do it? And that's how we do it.
I'm going to fire one question at you and then open it up, okay? So one industry we did not address today was the entertainment industry. Disney is a client of yours. How does an entertainment client, they like this, with so many different business units, ESPN, all of these different studios and theme parks, how do they think about it?
So when I sat down with Marty, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Disney, we're going through this, and Marty looks back at me and said, I don't need this. Anyone who is innovating in animation, theme parks, or entertainment either already works here or wants to work. Anyone who is designing something out there is bounding on the door trying to get in for us to do a proof of concept. So why do I have to change it? I'm from Boston, I remind you that there was a firm once called Tech. There was Wang, and then there was Polaroid, and there was Kodak. And I said, Marty, it's not an either or. Right? And so what we did is we took two simple little projects. We put it into an open collaborative environment, and we were the things that we talked about. Those two projects have already made it to the board of directors in less than 6 months. Those two projects are already resulting in reallocation of resources within Disney. So what it is, it's exposing people to a concept, and what we did is we ran them in parallel. Do it the way you normally do it, and now do it in an open collaborative environment. We got there faster, we got there with ideas that they would have never thought of, and we harnessed people outside the Disney organization that challenged the internal team.
Steve, you just finished building a system. Now, you're an IT company, so I understand there's a sort of a natural tendency to at least consider that. But did you think about looking out to the market prior to developing your own system? Was that a consideration?
Yes, and we actually had an incentive come in and speak at our innovation conference several years ago. And one of the differences for us is that there is a heavy emphasis on research, right? University engagements, and just simply taking the knowledge and transferring that among our employee base. And so there's the ideation piece, but there's also just the flat-out communication piece, and that's really where we're focusing.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to look to Benita for guidance. How much time do we do for questions?
Maybe a couple of questions.
All right.
I think everybody can ask 2 pounds together.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's just take 2 or 3 questions quickly. Any questions that I can surface? Did you have one, Pastor? All right. 1 or 2 questions? For challenge? Okay. I think that in light of that, why don't we transition? I want to thank Sean, Allison, Doug, Mike, and Steve. Thank you very much.